In August 1942, American forces landed on the small tropical island of Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands archipelago. This was the first major U.S. offensive operation in the Pacific following the attack on Pearl Harbor. The objective was to capture a Japanese airfield under construction, which upon completion could have controlled sea routes between the United States and Australia. The 1st Marine Division under the command of General Alexander Vandegrift landed with virtually no opposition and captured the unfinished airfield on August 7th. American engineers quickly completed construction, and the airfield was named Henderson Field in honor of Major Lofton Henderson, who was killed at the Battle of Midway. However, capturing the airfield was only the beginning of a long and brutal battle. Japanese command viewed the loss of Guadalcanal as a serious threat to their positions in the South Pacific. The General Staff in Tokyo ordered the island retaken at any cost. Over the following months, the Japanese methodically concentrated forces on the island, preparing for a decisive offensive. Meanwhile, the U.S. Marines established a defensive perimeter around the airfield. Conditions on the island were extremely harsh. The tropical climate, malaria, dysentery, and other diseases decimated personnel no less than Japanese snipers and artillery bombardments. Supply was irregular, as the Japanese fleet controlled the waters around the island at night. By October 1942, both sides were preparing for a decisive confrontation. The Japanese had assembled 3 divisions on the island, with a total strength of about 20,000 men. The Americans had roughly the same number of troops, but a significant portion of their personnel were non-combat effective due to disease and exhaustion. General Harukichi Hyakutake, commander of the Japanese 17th Army, developed a plan for a large-scale offensive against American positions. The main strike was planned from the south, through dense jungle, which Japanese command believed would provide concealment from American aviation and artillery. The plan called for simultaneous attacks on several sections of the perimeter, but the primary objective was to break through the southern sector of the defense and reach the airfield. Japanese forces were to depart on the evening of October 23rd, reach American positions during the night, and begin the attack at dawn on October 24th. Japanese command assumed there were no more than 10,000 American troops on the island, and that they were demoralized by the prolonged siege and disease. This assessment proved to be a serious mistake. In fact, the Americans had approximately 23,000 men, and despite the harsh conditions, they maintained their fighting spirit and readiness to defend. The American defensive perimeter was a system of fortifications surrounding Henderson Field. The perimeter was divided into several sectors, each defended by Marine battalions and Army units. The southern sector was considered one of the most vulnerable. Here the defensive line ran along a low ridge covered with brush and sparse forest. To the south of the ridge began dense jungle from which the Japanese could emerge at any moment. To the north of the ridge, the terrain was more open, giving defenders good fields of observation, but also meaning that a breakthrough of this position would give the Japanese a direct route to the airfield. The southern sector was defended by the 1st Battalion, 7th Marine Regiment, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Lewis Burwell Puller. Puller was an experienced officer who had served in the Marine Corps since 1918. He had participated in Caribbean campaigns in Haiti and Nicaragua, where he gained his first experience fighting guerrillas in the jungle. Puller's battalion numbered about 800 men. Most were young Marines with little combat experience. However, under Puller's leadership, the battalion became a cohesive and disciplined unit. Puller personally inspected every position, ensuring that foxholes were deep enough and fields of fire were well cleared. Throughout October, reconnaissance reported increasing Japanese activity in the jungle south of American positions. Patrols detected sounds of large troop movements. Captured Japanese soldiers reported preparations for a major offensive. On October 23rd, it became clear that the offensive would begin soon. Throughout the day, Japanese artillery and aircraft actively bombarded American positions. However, the main effort was directed at the northern sector of the perimeter, misleading American command about the direction of the main attack. Puller ordered his men to prepare for a night attack. All firing positions were checked, machine guns loaded, ammunition distributed. Artillerymen received coordinates for barrage fire in front of the battalion's positions. Communications personnel checked telephone lines to the command post and artillery batteries. With nightfall, a tense silence settled over the positions. Marines lay in their foxholes listening to the sounds of the jungle. Experienced fighters knew that the tropical night is never truly quiet. The sounds of insects, birds, and rustling leaves created constant background noise. Any deviation from this noise could signal the enemy's approach. Around 10 p.m., Japanese artillery opened fire on American positions. The bombardment continued for about 30 minutes, after which silence fell. It was at this moment that Japanese infantry began emerging from the jungle. The first groups of Japanese soldiers moved cautiously, trying to approach American positions undetected. However, the Marines spotted them quickly enough. The first shots rang out around 10:30 p.m. The Japanese returned fire and began advancing more aggressively. The first attack was relatively small in scale. About 200 to 300 Japanese soldiers attempted to break through the defense on the eastern flank of Puller's position. American machine gun and rifle fire stopped this attack at a distance of 50 to 70 meters from the forward edge of the defense. The Japanese withdrew, leaving several dozen dead. This was a probing attack. Japanese command was testing the strength of American defenses and looking for weak points in the line. After the first attack, there was a lull lasting about an hour. The Marines used this time to regroup and replenish ammunition. Around midnight, the main attack began. This time, the Japanese advanced on Puller's battalion positions in dense waves. According to Japanese tactics of the time, infantry attacked in compact groups, shouting battle cries and calls. American artillery opened barrage fire on coordinates pre-registered in front of the battalion's positions. 105mm howitzers fired at maximum rate. Shells exploded in the jungle and on the approaches to American foxholes. However, the Japanese continued their advance, taking significant casualties. When Japanese infantry closed to effective small arms range, Marine machine guns and rifles joined the battle. Machine gunners fired in long bursts, trying to create an impenetrable zone of fire in front of their positions. Riflemen selected targets and fired aimed shots. The intensity of Japanese attacks gradually increased. After each repelled attack came another, often more massive. Japanese command threw fresh forces into battle, trying through attrition to force the Americans to retreat or break through the defense through numerical superiority. Around 2 a.m., the situation became critical. The Japanese managed to break through at several points along the battalion's position. Small groups of Japanese soldiers reached the barbed wire and began crossing it. At some points, hand-to-hand fighting broke out. Puller personally directed the defense, moving between company and platoon positions. He directed reserves to threatened sectors and coordinated artillery fire. At one point, the Japanese came so close to American foxholes that further use of artillery became dangerous to friendly troops. Puller made the decision to call artillery fire at minimum distance from his own positions. He personally transmitted coordinates to the artillerymen, indicating impact points just 30 to 40 meters from the forward edge of the defense. This was a risky decision, as shell fragments could hit American Marines as well. However, the risk was justified given the alternative of a Japanese breakthrough. The artillery fire stopped the Japanese advance in this sector. The density of explosions was such that Japanese infantry could not move forward. The attack foundered, and the Japanese withdrew into the jungle, leaving dead and wounded on the battlefield. The fighting continued with unrelenting intensity through the early morning hours. The Japanese launched wave after wave of attacks, each time trying to find a weak point in the American line. The Marines held firm, their discipline and training proving equal to the desperate determination of the enemy. Around 3 a.m., reinforcements arrived in the form of the 3rd Battalion, 164th Infantry Regiment. These Army soldiers, many of them experiencing combat for the first time, moved into position on the left flank of Puller's Marines. Despite their inexperience, they quickly adapted to the nightmarish conditions and held their ground against repeated Japanese assaults. Throughout the night, the battle raged with a ferocity that few present would ever forget. The darkness was split by muzzle flashes, the crash of artillery, and the screams of fighting men. Machine gun tracers drew lines of fire across the jungle. The smell of cordite, blood, and torn earth filled the air. With the first light of dawn around 5 a.m., the intensity of Japanese attacks finally began to diminish. The enemy, having suffered catastrophic casualties and failed to achieve any breakthrough, began withdrawing into the jungle where thick vegetation could protect them from American air attack. When daylight came, the Marines and Army soldiers could assess the scale of the night's carnage. Before their positions lay hundreds of Japanese bodies. Some were just a few meters from American foxholes. At certain points, the Japanese had managed to cross the barbed wire barriers, but were stopped by fire in immediate proximity to the foxholes. The scene was one of complete devastation. Burial details began the grim work of counting enemy dead. The final tally would reach approximately 1,400 Japanese soldiers killed in this sector alone. It was a staggering number that spoke to both the determination of the Japanese attack and the effectiveness of the American defense. American casualties, while significant, were far lighter than they might have been. Puller's 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, suffered 24 killed, 28 wounded, and 2 missing. The 3rd Battalion, 164th Infantry, counted 29 killed and 70 wounded. In total, the defenders had sustained approximately 70 casualties in Puller's battalion and 99 in the Army battalion. Heavy losses, but the defensive line had held. Throughout the day of October 25th, the exhausted defenders strengthened their positions, evacuated the wounded, and replenished ammunition supplies. Patrols went out to check for Japanese stragglers and to gather intelligence. The men knew they had survived a desperate night battle, but they also knew the Japanese might try again. The day following the battle was spent in intensive preparation and reorganization. American command recognized that while the Japanese had been dealt a severe blow, they still had forces on the island and might attempt another assault. Additional reinforcements were brought up to strengthen the most vulnerable sections of the perimeter. Engineers worked to repair damaged fortifications and install additional obstacles. Fresh barbed wire was strung, and more anti-personnel mines were laid in likely approach routes. Medical personnel worked tirelessly to treat the wounded. Many Marines and soldiers were evacuated to the rear for surgery and recovery. The battalion aid stations were overwhelmed with casualties, and every available medic and corpsman was pressed into service. Supply personnel brought forward ammunition, food, and water. The fighting had consumed enormous quantities of machine gun and rifle ammunition, and artillery batteries needed to replenish their shell stocks. Every man received fresh rations and water, small comforts after the horror of the previous night. In the Japanese command post south of Henderson Field, the mood was grim. General Hyakutake and his staff reviewed the disastrous results of the October 24th to 25th assault. The loss of 1,400 men in a single night, with nothing to show for it, was a catastrophic blow to Japanese plans. The Japanese had thrown some of their best troops against well-prepared American positions and been completely repulsed. The myth of Japanese invincibility in jungle fighting had been shattered. Officers who survived the assault reported that American firepower, particularly artillery and automatic weapons, had created killing zones that no amount of courage could overcome. Despite the failure, the Japanese were not yet ready to abandon their efforts to retake Henderson Field. However, subsequent attacks would be less coordinated and on a smaller scale. The Japanese army on Guadalcanal had been severely weakened, and resupply remained difficult, with American air power dominating daylight hours. In the days following the battle, the extraordinary actions of individual Marines and soldiers became known throughout the division. Sergeant John Bassilone's heroism with his machine gun section was particularly noteworthy. Throughout the night, Bassilone had moved between gun positions under heavy fire, keeping his weapons in action even when ammunition runners were hit. At one critical point, when a gun crew was knocked out, Bassilone single-handedly operated the heavy machine gun, firing belt after belt of ammunition into attacking Japanese forces. His section was credited with killing hundreds of enemy soldiers. For his actions that night, Bassilone would be awarded the Medal of Honor, becoming one of the most celebrated Marines of the war. Lieutenant Colonel Puller's leadership throughout the battle had been exemplary. Despite the chaos and danger, he maintained control of his battalion, made critical decisions under fire, and inspired his men by his personal courage and coolness. His willingness to call artillery fire danger close to his own positions had saved the line from being overrun. For his actions during this battle, Puller would receive his Third Navy Cross. Countless other Marines and soldiers had performed acts of individual heroism that night. Machine gunners who fired until their barrels glowed red, riflemen who held their positions against overwhelming odds, corpsmen who braved enemy fire to reach wounded men, company and platoon commanders who led counterattacks to restore the line. Each had contributed to the victory. While the southern sector saw the heaviest fighting on the night of October 24th to 25th, other parts of the Henderson Field perimeter also came under attack. On October 23rd, the Japanese had launched a tank-supported assault on the northern sector, but this attack was stopped with heavy losses. Japanese tanks proved vulnerable to American anti-tank weapons and artillery. Naval battles continued in the waters around Guadalcanal. Both American and Japanese fleets sought to control the sea lanes and prevent the other side from reinforcing or resupplying their forces. These night naval battles were confusing, brutal affairs fought at close range, with heavy losses on both sides. In the air, pilots flying from Henderson Field continued to harass Japanese shipping and positions. Despite Japanese attempts to shell the airfield and render it unusable, American engineers repeatedly repaired damage and kept planes flying. Control of Henderson Field meant control of the air, and control of the air was proving decisive. In the week following the failed October offensive, Japanese forces made several smaller probing attacks, but nothing approaching the scale of the October 24th to 25th assault. Each attempt was repulsed with heavy Japanese casualties and minimal American losses. The battle for Henderson Field, as it came to be known, had been a decisive American victory. The Japanese had committed their best available forces in a maximum effort to recapture the airfield and had been soundly defeated. The failure had significant consequences for Japanese strategy in the South Pacific. The battle for the defense of Henderson Field demonstrated several important tactical lessons. First, it showed the ineffectiveness of Japanese tactics of massed frontal attacks against well-fortified positions with strong fire support. Japanese forces were willing to accept heavy casualties, but determination alone was insufficient against superior American firepower. Second, the battle underscored the importance of artillery in defensive combat. American artillery played a key role in repelling Japanese attacks. A well-organized fire control system allowed rapid response to threats and concentration of fire on the most dangerous sectors. The willingness to fire at danger-close distances when necessary proved crucial at critical moments. Third, the battle showed the value of position preparation and engineer support. The Marines spent weeks digging foxholes, installing barbed wire barriers, and creating firing positions. This work paid off handsomely when the Japanese offensive began. The fortifications significantly reduced American casualties and channeled Japanese attacks into predetermined killing zones. Fourth, the integration of Marine and Army units, despite their different training and organization, worked effectively under pressure. The soldiers of the 164th Infantry adapted quickly to the Marine way of fighting and held their sector of the line with distinction. Finally, the battle demonstrated the importance of quality leadership at all levels. Lieutenant Colonel Puller effectively directed his battalion's defense, making correct decisions at critical moments. Company and platoon commanders competently controlled their unit's fire. Individual Marines and soldiers displayed steadfastness and discipline under the most difficult night combat conditions. The battle for Henderson Field had far-reaching strategic consequences. The failure of the Japanese offensive meant the airfield would remain in American hands. This ensured Allied air superiority in the southern Solomon Islands region. From Henderson Field, American aviation could control sea lanes around Guadalcanal. This made it difficult for the Japanese to supply their forces on the island. Japanese convoys could approach the island only at night, using fast destroyers and cruisers. This supply method, dubbed the Tokyo Express, was inefficient and could not meet the needs of a large troop concentration. At the same time, the Americans gained the ability to supply their forces relatively freely during daylight under air cover from Henderson Field. This gradually shifted the balance of forces on the island in favor of the Americans. After the failure of the October offensive, Japanese command made several more attempts to retake Guadalcanal, but these attempts were less large-scale and also ended in failure. By December 1942, Japanese command began considering the possibility of evacuating their forces from the island. In February 1943, the Japanese conducted a successful operation to evacuate remaining forces from Guadalcanal. The island came completely under American control. This became Japan's first significant territorial loss in the Pacific War. Victory at Guadalcanal had important psychological significance. It showed that the Japanese army could be defeated in ground combat. Until then, Japanese forces were considered virtually invincible in the jungle. The Guadalcanal campaign shattered this myth. The battle also demonstrated the combat qualities of the U.S. Marine Corps. The Marines proved they could operate effectively in the most difficult conditions of tropical jungle, withstand prolonged siege, and prevail in close combat against a determined and skilled enemy. The Army units that fought alongside them also proved their worth in jungle warfare. The experience gained at Guadalcanal was used in subsequent campaigns in the Pacific. American command refined the tactics of amphibious operations, methods of jungle warfare, and ways of organizing defense on captured beachheads. Many officers and enlisted men who served at Guadalcanal later participated in battles at Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, applying their accumulated experience. For Japan, the loss of Guadalcanal marked the beginning of a long retreat. After February 1943, Japanese armed forces no longer conducted major offensive operations in the Pacific. The initiative definitively passed to the Allies. For his actions at Guadalcanal, Lieutenant Colonel Lewis Burwell Puller was awarded his Third Navy Cross. This was the highest decoration of the U.S. Navy after the Medal of Honor. Over his career, Puller received 5 Navy Crosses, becoming the most decorated recipient of this award in U.S. history. Puller continued serving in the Marine Corps after Guadalcanal. He participated in fighting at Cape Gloucester and Peleliu in 1944. During the Korean War, Puller commanded the 1st Marine Regiment and participated in the Incheon Landing and battles in the Chosin Reservoir area. Puller retired with the rank of Lieutenant General in 1955. He died in 1971 at the age of 73. Puller is considered one of the greatest officers in U.S. Marine Corps history and remains a legendary figure in the Corps. His nickname Chesty, derived from his barrel-chested physique and aggressive command style, is known to every Marine. Many of the individual Marines who participated in the defense of Henderson Field continued fighting in the Pacific. Some survived to the end of the war, others were killed in subsequent battles. Sergeant John Battalion, who received the Medal of Honor for his actions at Guadalcanal, could have remained in the United States as an instructor or participated in a war bond tour. However, he insisted on returning to combat units. In February 1945, Battalion participated in the landing on Iwo Jima, where he was killed on the first day of fighting. He was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross for his heroism on Iwo Jima, making him one of the few Marines to receive both the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross. Many other Guadalcanal veterans participated in battles at Tarawa, Peleliu, Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. Their experience and professionalism were invaluable to the Marine Corps in subsequent campaigns. They trained new Marines, led units in combat, and passed on the lessons learned in the jungles of Guadalcanal. The men of the 164th Infantry Regiment also continued their service in the Pacific. After proving themselves at Guadalcanal, they participated in other campaigns and earned respect from the Marines they had fought alongside. The bond formed in combat between Marines and Army soldiers on that October night lasted long after the war ended. Today on Guadalcanal, several memorials stand in memory of the battle. The most famous is located on Bloody Ridge, near where Puller's battalion repelled Japanese attacks. The memorial lists the names of fallen Marines and soldiers who gave their lives defending Henderson Field. Henderson Field continued operating after the war and was modernized. Today it serves as Honiara International Airport, capital of the Solomon Islands. The name Henderson Field is no longer used officially, but historical memory of the battle is preserved. Visitors to the airport are walking on ground that was once one of the most contested pieces of real estate in World War II. In the U.S. Marine Corps, memory of the battle for Guadalcanal is passed from generation to generation. Young Marines study the history of the campaign, analyze the defensive tactics at Henderson Field, and learn from the example of Puller and his Marines. The battle is taught at the Marine Corps' professional military education schools as a case study in defensive operations. The defense of Henderson Field remains an example of steadfastness, professionalism, and courage. 800 Marines of Puller's battalion, reinforced by Army soldiers, repelled attacks by a vastly superior enemy force through a night of desperate combat. They suffered significant casualties, but accomplished their mission. The airfield remained in American hands, which ultimately determined the outcome of the entire Guadalcanal campaign. This battle showed that troop quality, proper leadership, and competent organization of defense can compensate for enemy numerical superiority. The lessons of Guadalcanal were absorbed by American command and applied in all subsequent campaigns in the Pacific War. The story of the defense of Henderson Field is an important part of World War II military history. It demonstrates how a relatively small unit, properly organized and decisively led, can accomplish a strategically important mission at a critical moment of a campaign. The battle for Guadalcanal continued for 3 more months after the October Japanese offensive. The Japanese made less large-scale attempts to retake the airfield in November and December 1942, but all were repulsed by American forces. Each attack was met with the same combination of prepared positions, coordinated firepower, and determined resistance that had stopped the October offensive. Naval battles around the island also continued. Both sides suffered heavy losses in ships and aircraft. However, the initiative gradually shifted to the Americans, who had the ability to replace losses faster than the Japanese. The United States' industrial capacity was beginning to tell in the Pacific War. By the end of December 1942, Japanese command decided to evacuate forces from Guadalcanal. This operation was conducted in February 1943. About 10,000 Japanese soldiers were successfully evacuated on destroyers over several nights. About 25,000 Japanese servicemen died on the island from combat, disease, and starvation, a devastating toll that Japan could ill afford. American losses at Guadalcanal totaled about 7,000 men. The Marine Corps lost approximately 1,100 killed. Several thousand more were wounded or evacuated due to disease. The U.S. Navy lost several cruisers and destroyers in naval battles around the island. While significant, these losses were sustainable for the United States. Despite heavy losses, the Guadalcanal campaign was a strategic Allied victory. It halted Japanese expansion in the South Pacific and created conditions for further offensive operations against Japanese positions. More importantly, it proved that Japan could be defeated, that American forces could match and exceed Japanese troops in combat effectiveness. The defense of Henderson Field in late October 1942 was the culminating moment of the entire campaign. It was here that the fate of the island was decided. Had the Japanese succeeded in breaking through the defenses and capturing the airfield, the outcome of the campaign could have been entirely different. Without Henderson Field, the Americans would have been unable to maintain air superiority, supply would have become impossible, and evacuation likely necessary. Lieutenant Colonel Puller's battalion accomplished its mission. 800 Marines, reinforced by Army soldiers, withstood vastly superior enemy forces. They did not retreat, did not surrender their positions, did not allow the Japanese to break through to the airfield. Their steadfastness and professionalism became an example for the entire U.S. Marine Corps and set the standard for defensive operations in jungle warfare. The Guadalcanal experience showed that the Pacific War would be long and bloody. Every island, every beachhead would have to be won in hard fighting. But the experience also showed that the Japanese could be defeated, that their tactics had weaknesses, and that American forces were capable of operating effectively in any conditions. From Guadalcanal to Tokyo remained 3 more years of war. Ahead lay Tarawa, the Marshall Islands, the Marianas, the Philippines, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. Each of these campaigns demanded new sacrifices, but the path to victory began here, on a small tropical island in the South Pacific, where a group of Marines and soldiers proved that determination, preparation, and professional leadership are stronger than numerical superiority. The memory of Henderson Field's defenders lives on in U.S. Marine Corps history. Their example inspires new generations of Marines. Their sacrifice was not in vain. They fulfilled their duty at a critical moment in the war and contributed to the ultimate victory over Japan.